Happy One Piece Day to the best anime in all of shonen, maybe even the greatest of all time. I have a genuine love for this series, as many of y'all know. In fact, it was my review of their 4Kids adaptation that was the first video to really pop off on my channel. Outside that exception though, One Piece is usually known for their massive dubs, and in honor of this sacred weekend, I wanted to talk about one of the greatest arcs ever to come from this anime. Over a year ago, I talked about the Bount arc, which was a filler arc in the anime known as Bleach, and is widely considered to be the worst filler arc in the history of anime. Well, leave it to One Piece to create what is considered to be the best filler arc in all of anime.
Major Shepard, do you know this man?
No, sir, I do not.
G-8 is an anime-only arc that takes place after the events of Skypiea and before Long Ring Long Land. It's a rare exception of a filler arc that is considered to be better than parts of the canon. This might seem like small potatoes for One Piece watchers, but for viewers like me who go in raw and watch the unedited version, you'll know One Piece filler is often trash. So the fact that a great filler arc came from One Piece and is considered to be the best, not exclusively to the franchise, but within the entire genre of anime, that's f***ing huge. So why is G-8 considered a great filler arc? Well, first and foremost, it comes down to the story. A story that was so great, it was originally planned to be its own feature film. It was never specified which movie it would be, but given the timeline and release dates, it would have either replaced One Piece Film 4, Dead End Adventure, or Film 5, The Cursed Holy Sword. If it was Film 4, then they absolutely made the right call moving G-8 to the anime, but if it was Film 5, then they should have just scrapped that and given it to G-8. That's another sub-reason for why G-8 is a great arc, because it was intended to be high-quality bonus content rather than generic filler. Filler is created to, well, fill time in between animating mainline events. So the quality will never be as good as the canon, and often hurts the franchise because now you have characters struggling to fight someone subpar, whereas previously they might have been pushed to their absolute limit fighting a genuine world-ending threat. You're never going to care about characters that get introduced in filler because there's no real stakes and it doesn't impact the canon or help elevate it. But G-8 did, and it gave a great story following an arc that was considered mediocre, and right before an arc that was so poorly adapted to anime that anime-only viewers originally thought that was filler. So after leaving Skypiea, the Straw Hats fall back down to the Blue Sea. However, they touch down right in the middle of a marine base known as G-8. The stakes are very simple: escape and not get captured by the Marines. But what's interesting about this arc is that the Marines also have their own stakes. For anyone who hasn't watched this glorious anime, an important thing to note is how most Marines don't have any substandard goals. Most of them are just following orders, which is to capture any pirates they come across, and very rarely do we get a deep dive into their background or motivations outside a few key characters. G-8 was the first time One Piece viewers could actually care about the Marines and wanting them to succeed in some way. This is made present in the first episode, as most of it is spent introducing members of the squadron, taking a deep dive into their lives, and how G-8 has made them a pseudo-family. That's another thing that's interesting about this arc, how the location itself is also a character. You see, G-8 is very much dated and isn't really viewed as necessary anymore by the Marines. Around the same time the Straw Hats arrived, there was a discussion about disbanding the branch, and a scout will be arriving to make the final decision. Having the Straw Hats there definitely throws a wrench in their plan, but it also serves as an act of fate. The Straw Hats aren't familiar with the base, so they don't know how to escape on their ship, meaning the staff, led by the arc's main antagonist, Vice Admiral Jonathan, have an opportunity to prove their base is worth keeping around by capturing the crew and their captain worth 100 million berry. But it's not like the Marines are the only driving factor of this arc. The Straw Hats also have much going for them outside their usual shenanigans. By this point in the story, their ship, the Going Merry, has seen better days. After adventuring to Skypiea, they leave with a huge haul of treasure, which, after landing in G-8, gets confiscated by the Marines. The Straw Hats can't leave without recovering their treasure because they need that to help repair the Going Merry, which they consider a member of their crew. It's not overly dramatic, but it really helps establish this two-sided conflict and how both sides want to save something that's integral to their family. But what's really great about this storyline with the Straw Hats is how it helps elevate the canon by giving more depth to the crew members' relationship with the Going Merry. The Water 7 saga is very emotionally heavy, and that comes shortly after the arc following G-8. For those of you who don't know, huge spoilers, the Going Merry can't be fixed. So having this arc that really shows the length the Straw Hats will go in order to get their ship some necessary TLC only adds on to the weight and sadness that'll arise when it's ultimately deemed beyond repair. It's obvious a unique level of thought and care went into the characters when creating this arc. There's a few key perspectives, each with their own goals and unique relationships to other staff members on the island, which is made present with how they're able to handle the task at hand. I also really want to talk about the arc's main antagonist, Vice Admiral Jonathan, because he's not like any other filler arc antagonist or Marine we've seen in the franchise. You see, One Piece filler tends to go all or nothing with its antagonists. They either try to make them feel like a genuine threat, but ultimately miss, or they don't even try at all. At first, G-8's antagonist being a Vice Admiral gives off that same energy, because usually they rely on brute strength by either possessing a unique fighting style or devil fruit that's hard to combat. However, what separates Jonathan is not his strength, but rather his intelligence. He's a gifted tactician, and by having the Straw Hats play on his turf, that gives him the advantage he needs to lure, divide, and successfully capture most of them. In fact, over 20 years later, Vice Admiral Jonathan is still in a league of his own, and another thing that really solidifies this is how he's an antagonist that Luffy never fights. In fact, Jonathan himself doesn't fight at all in this arc. What separates him from other Marines in One Piece is how he focuses on executing a plan and implementing a strategy that is almost always successful. It's a series of mind games and figuring out how to get his enemies to take the bait. This metaphor is relevant because one of his character traits is how he enjoys fishing in his spare time. Him confiscating their treasure was all part of his plan to ensure they could never leave, and luring them close enough so that his squadron could capture them. He's not a perfect character by any means. In fact, he actually creates a bit of a plot hole because it's stated he's a protege and had a close relationship with Akainu. And if you know anything about One Piece, then you know why all my homies hate Akainu. But I don't necessarily blame the anime team for that issue. Keep in mind, Akainu had yet to debut in the manga, and at the time, he and Kizaru were only mentioned when the Straw Hats first met Aokiji. I'll still give them props for, trying to create intrigue with this information, but this was definitely an unlucky pick. Had they chosen Aokiji or Kizaru, I think Jonathan would have fit in perfectly with their ideology. Though, I guess you could always make the argument there's an emphasis on the word had in regards to their relationship. Maybe as Akainu went all in on absolute justice, Jonathan slowly walked in the opposite direction. Who's to say? The only thing that's for sure is that he was an amazing character in terms of writing. He was so great, in fact, that they actually brought him to the canon by including him during Marineford. He wasn't integral or anything, but I always found that to be a nice little homage to a really great character by including them in a really great arc. Going back to the Straw Hats, this arc also helped bring more depth to certain characters, particularly Robin, who really demonstrates her skills after being on the run for 20 years and from her time in the underworld. Given the fact that the next saga centers around her, much like the Going Merry, this arc helped showcase her relationship to the Straw Hats and elevate the tension that'll arise when she turns herself in to CP9. Alongside Robin, some other Straw Hats who get time to shine in this arc include Usopp, Nami, and Chopper, as since this is a problem that cannot be solved using brute force, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji definitely take a back seat during this arc, which I think was for the best. Now, while writing the script for this video, I wondered why the anime staff for One Piece didn't take a page out of G-8 and create more filler arcs like this. There are other good examples for sure, but definitely not to the same magnitude as G-8. And I think over time they realized this and couldn't make something as entertaining within the canon. So they decided to shift away from it and focus more on elevating their own isolated world, which is why after Enies Lobby and before Wano, most filler arcs served as a prequel to a feature film. For example, Z's Ambition is a prequel to One Piece film Z. Following that, Silver Mine is a subpar filler arc, but serves as a nice tease for One Piece film Gold. This helped create more filler episodes that were at least enjoyable, and definitely better than watching them try to stretch the canon, but none of them became a must-watch quite like G-8. There was just something about the way this arc was executed and its timing that made it fit in perfectly with the world of One Piece, and because of this, I believe it will forever be the closest thing we have to a perfect filler arc. But anyways, that about wraps up this discussion on One Piece. I firmly believe this is the best filler arc in the history of anime, and nothing else really comes close to the legacy G-8 left behind in terms of quality anime filler. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about this, and that's really about it. See ya.